My name is Morse Caoagas Flores, and I work for the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And as such, I serve as a Secretariat of the UN Voluntary Fund for Indigenous Peoples, and at the same time, as the coordinator of Indigenous Peoples Fellowship Program. I would like to welcome each one of you in the session on Project Access online course on Indigenous Peoples at the United Nations. So let's start. The United Nations UN Voluntary Fund for Indigenous Peoples was established in 1985. In fact, it's one of the oldest UN mechanisms specific to Indigenous peoples. This is following the establishment of the UN Working Group on Indigenous Population in 1982. So in short, it's been 32 years that this fund is being implemented. And its mandate since its inception was to ensure that Indigenous peoples will effectively participate into the session of the UN Working Group on Indigenous Population, whose session takes place in Geneva on an annual basis. Now, since then, the mandate of the fund has been extended 8 times. And you will see that the expansion of the mandate of the fund, you can also look at the historical development of Indigenous peoples in the UN system. So from supporting Indigenous people's participation to the UN Working Group on Indigenous Population, the next UN meeting that the fund has started to support is the open-ended working group on Indigenous peoples, whose mandate was to elaborate the drafting of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. From there, the fund started to provide support to Indigenous people's participation to the session of the UN Forum on Indigenous Issues that takes place in New York, sometimes in April or May on an annual basis for 2 weeks. And then from the forum, the fund started to provide support to Indigenous people's participation to the session of the UN Human Rights Council since 2006, including its universal periodic review mechanism. On top of that, the fund also provides support to Indigenous people's participation to the whole range of the UN treaty body sessions. So we have about 10 bodies that look at human rights record of all countries in the world who have either ratified or acceded to these international human rights treaties. For Indigenous peoples, you can also access the fund to participate in the session. In addition to that, we also have the UN mechanism, the expert mechanism on the rights of Indigenous peoples. In short, we call it MRIP. And Indigenous peoples could also request financial support in order to participate into the session of MRIP. And MRIP takes place its session in Geneva as well in April, June, or July. Now, most recently, there are 2 UN meetings that provides that Indigenous people could access to the fund and participate. The most recent one is first the UN Forum on Business and Human Rights. And this is taking place annually in Geneva in November. And then of course, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, or climate change processes. The climate change processes, the meeting takes place in different cities in the world or countries. But there are meetings of the climate change process that take place in Bonn. And then there are other meetings that take place in other countries, depending where the Conference of Parties or the COP session and its preparatory meeting takes place. So those are basically the UN meetings that the fund provides support, and I would repeat them again. You can apply for a grant to participate at the UN Forum on Indigenous Issues in New York, to the session of the Human Rights Council and its Universal Periodic Review in Geneva, to the session of the whole range of treaty bodies, as well in Geneva, to the UN Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or MRIP, again, also in Geneva. And then the most recent ones being the climate change process and the UN Forum on business and human rights. Now, when it comes to the criteria of application to the fund, there are several criteria that you have to look into. Of course, the most important is you need to be an Indigenous person to apply for the fund. The board doesn't take into consideration application from NGOs who are not Indigenous, even if the person that they are recommending is Indigenous. Second, the board normally takes only 2 applications per organization. The board encourages the application from Indigenous women, youth, and Indigenous peoples with disabilities. And then finally, the board give a lot of emphasis on application coming from Indigenous peoples who are working in their own communities or in their own organization, in their own countries, as opposed to those who are working outside of their countries. So those are the most important criteria when you're applying for the fund. Now take note, the Board of Trustees also look into your previous participation in other UN meetings, whether you have had received grants from the fund in previous sessions, or whether this is your first time applying or receiving a grant. Now, I've been mentioning about the UN fund being administered by the Board of Trustees. Indeed, we do have 5 members of the Board of Trustees of the fund that is mandated to provide advice in the administration of the fund. It advises the Secretary General of the United Nations through the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which serves as the Secretariat of the fund. Now, in addition to providing grants to Indigenous peoples, the UN Voluntary Fund also provides capacity building, especially to grantees of the fund. How do we do that? Basically, what happens is that prior to the sessions of the Permanent Forum in New York or the UN Expert Mechanism in Geneva, the Secretariat of the Fund, in collaboration with, of course, with the Board of Trustees and relevant partner organizations, Indigenous or not, including Tribal Link, for example, or other sister UN agencies, or the other UN mechanisms on Indigenous peoples, we organize what we call preparatory training course on Indigenous peoples. And normally, if this is at the Permanent Forum, all our grantees of the fund are required to attend 2 or 1 day preparatory training course on the mandate of that meeting that they are attending. And it's the same way in Geneva. When you are participating as a grantee to the UN Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, there is also a required preparatory training course that you have to go through before the session. And precisely this is to ensure that the grantees could effectively participate in the meetings that they are attending. And not only that, they would also allow for the grantees to get to know other grantees of the fund. So then they can start building rapport, building networks, and why not building collaboration. For example, we have had grantees in the past. We have delivered joint statements because they have been in the same caucuses in different meetings. And that is where one of the most important impact of the fund, in addition to ensuring that Indigenous peoples are able to participate in UN meeting, is about establishing a strong network or community of Indigenous people in the different UN mechanisms or meetings. Now, You have to take note as well that when you are applying for a grant to the fund, depending on which UN meeting, there are certain requirements in order for you to participate. And I would like you to take note of that. Now, the most important and the most crucial for Indigenous people is the one where you need to have a very specific UN OHCHR status as an NGO to participate in those meetings. There are two meetings where you are required to have that. One is into the session of the UN Human Rights Council that takes place in Geneva. And second, into the session of the Universal Periodic Review. Meaning, in order for you to participate in the sessions, you have to ensure that the organization that is recommending you or providing you support to participate into these meetings, they have UN OHCHR status. Now, if you are coming from an organization that doesn't have that status, my advice to you, my suggestion to you is to find an Indigenous or a non-Indigenous organization that have the status. In Geneva, we have several of these international organizations that facilitates the participation of Indigenous peoples in UN meetings. Now, the other UN meetings, for example, at the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, at the UN Expert Mechanism on Indigenous Peoples, or to the UN treaty bodies, including the UN Forum on Business and Human Rights and the climate change relevant meetings. The most important thing that you need to bear in mind is to register ahead of time and to ensure that you have the necessary supporting letters from your organization when you register, because they do require some of this. Now, the UN Forum on Indigenous Issues, the expert mechanism, the UN Forum on Business and Human Rights, these meetings, they're almost public meetings. Anyone can register and participate in these meetings. Now, what do you need to understand when you are given the grant from the fund? First, in addition to some of those accreditation or registration requirements, there are other 2 or 3 very important requirements for you to submit. Especially, one is for the UN treaty bodies. For you to be selected as a grantee to the UN treaty bodies, you have to ensure that you submit a shadow report to the UN treaty body that you are applying. What does it mean? It means that 6 months or 8 months in advance, that is the deadline where you have to submit the alternative report or shadow report to the treaty bodies. So that when you apply for grant to attend to this session, you have to indicate in your application that the reason why you are applying for this session is because your organization or your organization in collaboration with other NGOs or Indigenous peoples organization have submitted a joint shadow report to the committee. If you have submitted a shadow report, it's almost 100% that the fund will provide support to you. Now, this is the same requirements that we ask for Indigenous peoples in order for them to participate at the UPR session. The same procedure, you have to ensure that you submit a stakeholders report on the situation of Indigenous peoples in your country or in your own region before the deadline to the UPR submission. Again, you can submit on your own capacity as an organization or in collaboration with other NGOs. So take note of those two. So first, for the treaty bodies, make sure that you submit a shadow report. Second, to the UPR, make sure that you submit a stakeholders report. Now, when it comes to the grant cycle or application cycle to the fund, normally the board decides every 3 months. So they have a quarterly intersessional meeting where every 3 months they look at the application to the fund. So for example, we normally from the Secretariat, we normally call or send the call for application to our Indigenous network. We normally post them in our website or share widely to our network, the call for applications. And the call for applications are shared 3 months in advance. So that would allow any grantee who needs to apply for a visa to apply for visas. So let's say from January to March, the call for all the sessions that are taking place from January to March, the call for application is in September, October, November. That's the first cycle. The second cycle is from April to June. So the call for application is normally in January. And the third cycle is from July to September. That's in summer. So the call for application is in spring, in April. And then finally, all sessions that are taking place between October to December, which is the third quarter, it's the winter session, the call for application is in autumn. So take note of that. Tips that you need to bear in mind when you are applying for the grant. First, make sure that you submit your application ahead of time, way before the deadline. So you need to find out first when is the session taking place. Second, you have to ensure that when you send your application, you send it either in English, Spanish, or French, in those 3 languages. Third, make sure that you submit as well all the required attachment. For example, normally in the application form for the grant, you are always requested to submit a supporting letter from your organization. So make sure that you have that supporting letter attached to your application. Now, finally, once you receive a grant, there are also many important preparations that you need to take note. Because it is not just about participating to the meeting. In fact, the most important work that you need to do is actually prior to the meeting. So the first thing you need to do is first do your research, consult your people, your organization, or within your network. You need to find out first the situation of your people. Second, what are the key messages you want the UN or the world to know about your people? Third, do you have any specific cases that you wanted to highlight when you attend the session? Fourth, in addition to highlighting the challenges that your organization or your people are facing in your country, you also have to make sure that you also need to be a part of the solution. So make recommendations. And when you do make recommendations, make sure that these recommendations are something that you can follow up, that are specific, that you can measure them in terms of achievement. So for example, if you want to recommend a specific recommendation to the United Nations in your own country, make sure that you address your recommendation to a specific UN agency. You could mention this recommendation is for UNDP, this recommendation is for the ILO, this recommendation is for OHCHR. Or you can also mention this is a recommendation to all the members of the UN country team. You can also specify that this recommendation is to your government, and you can mention the specific ministry or agency within your own government. All right, now that's first. Second, it is very important for you to follow up, as I mentioned earlier on. It's going to be a missed opportunity for you to participate in UN meetings and you don't follow up. So how do you follow up? First, you can follow up in your country when you are back to your country. Or second, you can follow up when you come back again in Geneva for another meeting. You do it within the permanent mission of your country to the UN. Now, I was talking before about preparation before coming to UN meetings. Now, what I'm telling you now is post-participation to UN meeting. In fact, those are linked. It's almost like a cycle. You prepare, you participate, you follow up. And then afterwards, you apply again, you follow up, you prepare, you participate. So make sure that when you apply for a grant for the fund, that you are not just applying for one time, like a one-shot gun situation. You have to ensure, because changes in Indigenous people's communities or in our countries takes a lot of time. So sometimes some of these changes, they needed to be accompanied within the process. Now, in terms of impact of the fund, I can tell you that for the past 30 plus years, the fund has provided support to more than 3,000 Indigenous representatives in different UN meetings from over 90 countries. And that is a huge support to Indigenous people. In fact, the fund has ensured that for the past 30 plus years, there is a sustained Indigenous people's presence in the UN meetings that are specific or relevant to Indigenous peoples. That's one of the most important contributions of the fund to Indigenous people. Of course, the fund has also accompanied Indigenous peoples for the past 30 years in the development of the different UN mechanisms on Indigenous issues. Like the Permanent Forum, for example, the UN Working Group on Indigenous Population, EMRI, including the most recent revision of the mandate of EMRI, which is the country engagement. The fund has supported the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples. And as a result of this World Conference, that's how we managed to have the interactive hearing on Indigenous peoples at the General Assembly. And again, the fund has also, for the past years, has been providing support to Indigenous peoples' participation into the interactive hearing. Now, we are indeed very grateful to our partner member state who've been contributing to the fund. As a fund that is specific to Indigenous peoples, it's possibly one of the oldest in the office. And for the past 30 plus years, we have seen countries that has committed to maintaining the fund. So for example, we have, like, for the past decades, we have countries like Argentina, Chile, Estonia, Denmark, Finland, Norway. We have recently Germany, Canada, for example, Spain, Australia, that has contributed to the fund for the past couple of years. Now, we have a very good news. For the first time, we have one country that has contributed to the fund for 2021, and the very first one in Asia, and that is the Philippines. So we are also very grateful for the contribution from the Philippine government. We really hope that other countries in Asia would also follow. We haven't had any country in Africa that have contributed to the fund. Now, I would also like to highlight that in addition to member state, NGOs, private sector, including individuals and foundations, can also contribute to the fund. So if you want to contribute to the fund, you just need to get in touch with the Secretariat of the UN Voluntary Fund. Now, I would like to wrap up this session. So once again, there are a couple of points that I would like you to remember. First, the UN Voluntary Fund for Indigenous People. This is one of the oldest UN mechanisms that is specific to Indigenous issues. It's been running for the past 32 years. It has provided support to over 3,000 Indigenous representatives in ensuring that there is an effective participation of Indigenous peoples in the most important and most relevant meetings on Indigenous issues. So for example, the UN Working Group on Indigenous Population, the open-ended working group on the draft declaration. They don't exist anymore, but those two have created the momentum in ensuring that we have a UN declaration on Indigenous peoples under it. Now, in addition to those two, you have the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, the UN Mechanism on Indigenous Peoples. Of course, you have the UN Human Rights Council and its Universal Periodic Review. You have the whole range of UN treaty bodies. And most recently, now, Indigenous peoples can now participate to the session of the UN Forum on Business and Human Rights and to the UN climate change processes. As Indigenous representative, it's very important for you to apply in advance to ensure that you submit the necessary requirements, that you ensure that once you get the grant, that you prepare before coming to those or joining those meetings, and to follow up, whether this is to your government, to your own people or organization, or with the UN system, for example. And as grantees of the fund, you are the best ambassador of the fund. So make sure that you also talk about the fund and share your experience in those UN meetings with your own people, within your own network, or within your own organization. So once again, I thank you for this opportunity to share about the mandate and the work of the fund. And I really hope that we will receive your application on the next call for application. Once again, thank you very much for this opportunity.